And so my dad, who's 93 and not doing great right now, but he's at Yale Law, graduate, Yale undergrad. My dad used to say, there's only one race, and it's the human race, right? We make a lot of noise about, how we're different. I like to spend a lot more time thinking about how we're all the same. And as I've said when I've spoken in front of, Black audiences, every one of those people in that audience cares about the same thing I care about, which is I want a better world for my kids. I want a better opportunity for my kids. We're all the same. And I think we've got to start to understand that, at least in this country, diversity is our secret sauce. I mean, we do it better. So but we don't do it well enough. So we've got to figure out how to do it even better.
Welcome to People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur, here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact and to shine a light on all the good happening in a world often hyper-focused on the negative. Today's episode features David Weild IV, a financial guru who is the former Vice Chairman and Executive Vice President of the NASDAQ and currently runs his investment banking firm, Weild Co. David is known as the father of the Jobs Act and dedicates himself to opening up financial opportunities in underserved communities and beyond. David and I discuss his journey from molecular genetics to finance, his friendships with Steve Jobs and Michael Jackson, his transformational work on getting the Jobs Act passed, and how providing financial opportunity can continue to be a great equalizer in our society. Here is David Weild IV on People Are the Answer. David, thank you so much for joining me on People Are the Answer.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's truly an honor. I'm excited to learn more about you and share your story with the audience. It'd be great if you could start off by just telling the audience, who you are, where you're based, and what your current role is.
Well, I was vice chairman of NASDAQ. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm sort of known for. But I got the first piece of and the only piece of pro capital access legislation done through the U.S. Congress in 83 years. I mean, actually, I'm the only living person to do something like that. I think that's probably a sign of being incredibly perseverant and maybe not taking no for an answer, but. Like the guy in Network, if you know the movie, where you stick your head out the window and say, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." But I've always sort of felt that we could be a lot better than we are as a country, and that we have a kind of a moral obligation to try and help people sort of assimilate into the economy and do better and have upward mobility. And I think that we have a tendency to kind of punch well below the weight that we're capable of punching at. So that's me in a nutshell. I started an investment bank. It's investment banking as a movement, if you will, and we are in 20 decentralized 100. We've got 126 professionals in 20 plus states, and we want to ramp it to 1,000 and be in all 50 states, and then 10,000, and bring real services to Main Street in the investment banking area to sort of support economic development more broadly than it's being supported. So that's consistent. I think I've got a big well of public policy stuff that I need to get back to try and help with the deficit, help grow the economy, help get people moving upwardly in the economy, and basically leaving the country in a much better place than it is today. And particularly that problem-solving entrepreneurial portion of the economy that is so important to, like coming up with vaccines for COVID, which we contributed with the Jobs Act, to finding how to how to decarbonize the atmosphere so we don't boil ourselves alive. I mean, those are the things that sort of appeal to me.
Yeah, no, that's really cool to hear. And I really liked what you said about helping people with upward mobility, and that so many of us aren't reaching the true potential that we have. And a lot of that being about circumstance and access. And, so normally at this moment, I would ask what motivates you, but it sounds like you kind of shared that already. It sounds like helping people and helping the world be in a little bit of a better place.
Yeah, well, I think that I see, I have a gift, an aptitude for really complicated systems, and politics is complicated, capital markets is complicated. And I had sort of intuitive, I was a geneticist, right? And genomics is complicated. And so there's a lot of things that I'm not very good at, but making sense out of kind of ambiguity and chaos, and then trying to kind of put a plan in place to be able to move the ball down the field, so to speak, are the things that take a lot of work, but I tend to be pretty good at it. And so, as I like to say, there are great systemic problems and challenges of our time, and they require systemic solutions. And so, I think that if we can spitball more systemic solutions to these problems, we can move ourselves forward at a much more rapid rate, which is going to be essential to kind of to beat the clock on climate change and the next pandemic, things like that. So
Yeah.
it's a little esoteric, but I mean, basically, what we really want to do is enable more and more entrepreneurs and engineers and scientists to kind of innovate our way out of all sorts of different kinds of problems, and at the same time get money into depressed areas of the country that need it to kind of engender some upward mobility and get people more integrated into the economy. And so my dad, who's 93 and not doing great right now, but he's at Yale Law, graduate, Yale undergrad. My dad used to say, there's only one race, and it's the human race, right? We make a lot of noise about, how we're different. I like to spend a lot more time thinking about how we're all the same. And as I've said when I've spoken in front of, Black audiences, every one of those people in that audience cares about the same thing I care about, which is I want a better world for my kids. I want a better opportunity for my kids. We're all the same. And I think we've got to start to understand that, at least in this country, diversity is our secret sauce. I mean, we do it better. So but we don't do it well enough. So we've got to figure out how to do it even better. And I think that by creating, by changing capital flows so that they support people who don't have opportunity, and in having opportunity and having people that have the capability to mentor those people, give them an economic incentive, that might be a great way to kind of drive inclusion and integration and upward mobility, and drive down incarceration rates and teenage pregnancy rates and all the things that go along with it.
Yeah, no, that makes a tremendous amount of sense, and certainly a lot of people to be helped out there, and appreciate your focus on it. So I'm curious, I always ask innovators in impact where they grew up. So, where did you grow up, and what was it like there?
Well, I was in the Northeast. I was in Westchester County mostly. I started, actually, I was as a young tyke, I was in the public city school system in the Bronx. I was in a good area, a good school in Riverdale. And then I got bused to a not so good school that, if you looked at it online, looked a little bit like being in the prison yard. It had a blacktop playground with a 20-foot high fence. I wasn't sure if it was to keep us, out of the, or in, or the people on the outside out, or, out. But it was, we used to get mugged in the bathroom for when I was in second grade for our lunch money. So it was a little rough. But I mean, when you're a kid, you're used to what you're used to, and you kind of, but it leaves an impression, and you're a little bit maybe more observant about things. So, I think since we got the Jobs Act done, years ago, I've walked through a lot of projects in this city. I was with Saquon Barkley when he was giving out book bags to to kids where they back to school, and just making observations about what it might be like, growing up in areas like that. And I think that we've created a lot of low income housing and projects in this country. Some is better than others, but I think in many instances we create systems that actually decrease the likelihood that kids are going to be successful, and they're more likely to be incarcerated because there's not a lot for teenagers to do. And so I think that there's a lot of this stuff that just needs reimagination, re-engineering, and maybe the economic work behind it to kind of understand what the cost benefit would be to the country. Does it turn more of our people into human capital, or does it, and do we prevent more from becoming human liabilities? And is there a return on it? What is the impact ultimately on the deficit, for example? Because we have the highest incarceration rates of any country in the world, and I don't know that that's anything for us to brag about. And the question is, what can we do to keep that from happening and to take those people and channel them into the economy so that they actually produce?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Myself working in criminal justice reform, it's certainly an atrocity, I think, that we have such an incredible population in our prison system. And there's a lot of work we can do, a lot of untapped potential in so many of these individuals, and, appreciate the work that you're doing toward that end. And, it sounds like that experience, in that school growing up, maybe showed you some things and sort of gave you some of this insight and empathy towards more disadvantaged audiences. And I'm curious if there was like a specific experience as a child that, really hit you or showed you how important it was to give it back or to give back, that sticks with you today.
Well, I have a younger brother who is profoundly deaf and handicapped, and I just know how lucky I am to have, all of my senses functioning. And it's the, but for the grace of God, go I, or go we. I mean, I think that, a lot of times our circumstances, determine our future. Not entirely. I mean, it's that whole debate about environment versus genetics, and but I do think that environment plays a big role, a very large role, and kids don't choose their circumstances. They don't choose to be handicapped. They don't choose, to be in a single mother household in a chronically poor, crime infested neighborhood. But yet they find themselves in those circumstances through no fault of their own. And I think that the adults that have an ability to maybe think different, to paraphrase, to quote Steve Jobs, and maybe to come up with better solutions that'll create better outcomes for all of those people. I think we have a moral obligation to put our gray matter to work and see if we can't come together and figure out a better outcome.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And I also wanted to note, when you were a kid, you'd mentioned to me in a previous conversation that you would, take care of animals that were recuperating from injuries and stuff like that. So I'm curious how you got into that.
Well, I loved animals. I don't know why. I had when I was a little kid, we had these zebra finches, and my mother used to clean the cages, let them out of the cage, and they'd lay eggs on the bookshelves, because they were so excited. And I just started taking an interest in anything that was alive, and one thing went to the next, and God, I had a blue jay that as a pet that I rescued from a nest for many, many years. I had a three-legged box turtle. I had a squirrel that I rescued that had fallen out of a nest for many years. And then I bred different kinds of birds, and it was a handful. My parents were incredibly tolerant of my kind of hobby, and so when I went off to a boarding school, it kind of put most of that behind me. But I always had a kind of a soft spot, for.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think animals provide so much for us, and it's awesome when we can provide back. And um, I'm curious, you mentioned going to boarding school. How did you eventually end up getting your bachelor's in molecular genetics and biology at Wesleyan University?
Well, I was really good in high school in biology, and it was sort of one of those things that I just I liked animals, I liked biology, I liked things related to it. And then what I found when I got into biology in college, that the area of biology that I was particularly adept at was genetics and molecular genetics. I mean, I was like, I remember we had a professor who walked into the pre-med genetics class, and there were 250 students in it. And he said at the beginning, this is an interesting course because for some of you people that are okay students and are doing okay but not great, this is going to be the easiest course that you've ever taken. And then for some of you guys that are, are amazing students and brainiacs and straight A's, and you're going to find that there's something about this course that just vexes you, and you may fail out of this course. Okay, and so I happen to be the kid in the class that never opened the book, and got the best grade in the class, and I had pre-med students cheating off of my exams, people that went on to be medical doctors. It was kind of hilarious. They were all medical doctors now, but they were drowning in it. And I think that it's this kind of, area of, they call it managing an ambiguity or making sense out of complex systems. And it's fairly intuitive, and it, for me, and but a lot of things aren't, right? I mean, I'm not a great physicist. I'm not a great, chemist. But when you put me into very complicated, ambiguous systems, I tend to do well. And that's what Washington is. I mean, it's incredibly convoluted and complicated. And then, you have to kind of tease out what are the key checkpoints to be able to get anything done. I mean, if you think about it, the only piece of pro-capital access legislation that has been passed in this country that's of any size, and it's up on the SEC's website. Okay, so that's their official list. The last one was the Investment Company Act of 1940. The Jobs Act gets done in 2012. So right there, you're looking at, what does that work out to be, 72 years or something? And then, you fast forward. So now it's been 82 years. So, I mean, it's not hyperbole to say that I'm the only living person in the country that's gotten a piece of pro-capital access legislation of size through the U.S. Congress. And what pains me about it is we're out raising around a capital. We want to set up a Weild Foundation ultimately for American competitiveness, so that I can effectively teach people what we did that made that successful. What are all the touch points that allow people on both sides of the aisle to embrace legislation to move the country forward? Because what you learn when you go down to Capitol Hill is that we have a deep expertise in economics and capital markets. It's something that really doesn't exist with the average congressman. And so, not only do you have to really get things down to a point where they're incredibly compelling and sometimes even shocking and shock people into action, but then you have to have remedies, and you have to be able to articulate who are people's enemies and who are the allies here. You have to minimize it because they've all got to run for office, right? So, and you've got to build these coalitions of people that are going to be interested, because what do they all run it through this sort of analysis of who's going to stroke me a check to help me run for office, and who's going to line up and stroke my competitor. And so once you start to understand all those pieces, you can systematically de-risk things and put them into a position where they're apt to get done. I like to say there's three types of politics, right? There is performative politics, which is they just put it up there. They know it's not going anywhere, and it's just to pander to their base, right? There is partisan politics, which is they're going to get it done and they're going to jam it down the other side's throat, and they're just going to do it. And that, whether it's Obamacare, where there's not a lot of, two-party participation, it was the Trump tax bill, it was the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really the climate change bill, right? And then there's that part that I call patriotic. Okay, patriotic politics, patriotic policy, and very little of it is actually getting done. There are 12,000 plus lobbyists in Washington. They're all stroking checks. They're all arguing for somebody's self-interest, and that kind of overwhelms the Congress and the Senate, and it makes it very difficult ultimately to tease things out. And so there's a role for somebody to effectively get out there and to do things that are really balanced and moving the country forward and evangelizing that, educating people about how we can do things differently, how we can pay down the deficit without having to either increase taxes or cut spending. I mean, think about that, right? Because nobody's got any appetite to cut spending right now or to increase taxes. So how do you do that? Well, we have some ideas around how that can happen that may be much more politically palatable. And Lord knows we need to get that done, because otherwise we're continuing to mortgage our future.
So you've mentioned the Jobs Act and all the effort that went into it. So you're known as the father of the Jobs Act, and you've been involved in drafting a variety of legislation. For those unfamiliar listening, what is the Jobs Act and what drew you to it?
Well, it didn't start out being a Jobs Act. I mean, it was the Washingtonians that came up with the name, and it helps passage. It stands for, it's actually an acronym, which stands for the Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act. And it's seven separate titles, or if you will, seven separate bills. And a lot of them, some of them came directly from me, like the repeal of the prohibition against general solicitation and private placement. So it allows you to broadly market a private placement. Some of them, were inspired to a large degree from the data they were all inspired by the data. We actually showed people a couple of things that it really scared the dickens out of people on the Financial Services Committee, so much so that a couple of charts were actually pulled and they were put up on the flat panel display screens. And one of those charts showed the number of publicly listed companies on NASDAQ in New York versus and the trend lines over time, like are they growing or are they shrinking, versus China versus Germany versus about 12 different countries. China was on the top and growing like a weed, and the United States was crashing and burning. And nobody knew that in the U.S. Congress or at the SEC, because what they were doing was they were reporting listed companies not just as the operating company sample, the ones that were the engineering scientific companies, the ones that employed people, but they were commingling all these exchange traded funds and closed end funds. And so when you just looked, if all listings are created equal, it looks like we're growing and everything's fine. But if you looked at the operating company sample, the manufacturing, all that stuff, and you took it, you saw all of a sudden we went from 9,000 publicly listed companies in our markets to 5,000. And we didn't recover. It was like an Armageddon. And it's like you sit there as an American, as a patriot, and you're sitting there and you're saying, who the hell is in charge of this stuff, right? I mean, how can you miss that, right? It's an incredible failure of oversight on the part of our government, and Americans deserve better. And a lot of that was market structure related. I mean, we dropped the bottom out of support for smaller capitalization stocks. And so we started to talk about the need for getting more money into more companies and creating and increasing the sort of the velocity of capital and the access to capital. And that's what the Jobs Act was fundamentally about. But I would tell you that it's not enough. We have a lot more work to do in that area to realize our potential. I don't believe that we can be satisfied with 3% GDP, long-term growth rates. I don't think that there's a reason why we shouldn't be able to do 5% or something over the long run without triggering inflation. And I think that we need to kind of think that way and because that has a massive impact on what we do with the deficit over and getting our fiscal house in order at some point. But also, like if you talk about ways to grow the economy, Jeff, I mean, if labor participation is a big one, right? In other words, if I get more people into the economy, forget unemployment. I mean, I think it's like, it takes people's eye off the ball. Let's focus on labor participation. I want more of the people that are in this country gainfully employed. And that means that you have to go to the bench and you got to grab the guys in the poor neighborhoods that you've been incarcerating. And you've got to grab, the single moms and support them so that they can get to work. You've got to get older people and you got to keep them in the economy and give them a carrot and a reason to stay employed so that you can take pressure off of Social Security and take pressure off of the deficit. I mean, there's a lot of ways, and instead of having people basically consume entitlements, right, and be a cost to the economy, we can turn them into a profit center for the economy and dig our hole out of our way out of this hole that we put ourselves in.
Yeah, no, that makes tremendous sense, and it very much aligns with kind of your interests and what you've been working on for all these years. And, so for the average American out there, what is sort of in layman's term, how does the Jobs Act affect them?
Well, I mean, if you take the poor, I mean, we had criminalized soliciting capital from people that were either not accredited or from people you didn't have a pre-existing relationship with. The problem with that is if you're poor, you don't know anybody that's accredited. So we were incarcerating people for just trying to fund a business or depriving them of the ability of an opportunity towards upward mobility. So I thought it was kind of shameful. And that was, actually the current chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, Patrick McHenry, is a Republican. Patrick was the guy that actually sponsored Reg CF or crowdfunding. Okay. And Patrick did it because he saw his father struggle trying to finance a business when he was growing up. Okay. And he understood it firsthand. I think that the repeal of the prohibition against general solicitation, which created Reg D private placements that are now called 506C, that gave people the ability to generally solicit money from people that have money without having a pre-existing relationship. Of course, if you grow up in a poor neighborhood, that you need that as a tool in your toolkit, because otherwise, you probably don't have any of those relationships. And fundamentally, if you read about prejudice in the country, and there's a thing called contact theory that goes back, I think, to the 1950s, but basically it says that if you work with and you have contact with people that are different than you, then your tendency towards being prejudiced starts to dissipate. It melts away. And by working with people who are, black or brown or whatever, if you're white or vice versa, you start to realize, hey, people are people, and it's just a little bit more melatonin in their skin, right? And that fundamentally you find that common ground, and all of a sudden you redefine your tribe so that now my tribe is a multicultural, colored tribe as opposed to a homogeneous, all people look like me kind of tribe. And I think that is fundamentally something that you need to figure out in a society, how to encourage those kinds of contacts, because it actually creates better glue. It also creates diversity of opinion and view, which supports creativity and solution making, and actually in the academic literature is demonstrated to drive towards better outcomes.
Yeah. No, that's such an important things to recognize in society. And, I really am thankful for your work, and that it opened up the opportunities on the business side for people that, came up under different circumstances. And I want to go backwards a little bit. I know you got your MBA from NYU Stern School of Business. And can you tell me about the path from that into your career, as the president and head of corporate finance at ECM Prudential Financial, eventually getting to the NASDAQ?
Yeah. So what happened was I wanted to do venture capital, coming out of college and business school, but I didn't have an operating background. And, I saw Genentech go public in 1980. The stock, was priced around $30 a share. It gapped open to 80. I've been having this argument with my dad about the ability to patent life sciences. And, my father, who is a bit of an intellectual property purist, Yale lawyer, he said that naturally occurring substances, can't be patented. And my retort is that there's so much at stake here that people will figure out a way to patent these things, whether they tweak something or whatever. And I think that turned out to be the case. Ironically, Leslie Misrock, who was considered to be the grandfather of the biotech patent business, was a partner of my father's and a good friend of Mike Milken's. And we had I saw them go public, and it set me on a path. I was in business school the second year. I was writing for Genetic Engineering News while I was on exchange in France and in Sweden at the Stockholm School of Economics and HEC in France. And when I came back, it was a lousy market, and I was looking for a job, and I couldn't find one easily because, again, a bad stock market, bad job market, and somebody offered me an opportunity to be an analyst within an IPO a syndication department, and figuring if he can do the molecular genetics, he can do this, right? And so I started taking apart other people's deals and asking for positions to move them through their retail brokerage network. And then ultimately I got Battlefield promoted to be the youngest product center manager in the firm, and took over the equity syndicate department. And I was telling a guy at Merrill Lynch more about his deals than he knew about him. He was running the group at Merrill. And so he decided he had to hire me. And then he went over to Prudential Securities, and then continued trying to court me, and then cornered me in a room, and he said, "What does it take to make you work for me?" And so he made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I ended up back in New York, and then I ran the IPO business and follow-on equity business. So I had a great time. Look, I mean, I raised the first money for Larry Fink at BlackRock and Ralph Schlosstein. I mean, it was the first. Every other mortgage-backed fund had failed. We raised $600 million out of the blocks for them, and that became a very fruitful relationship for Prudential Securities. I worked on an early stage financing for Celgene that ultimately got it kept the lights on when it was about $100 million in market value. It ultimately got sold to Bristol Myers Squibb for $74 billion. I worked on the NVIDIA IPO with Morgan Stanley years ago for Jensen Huang, which is now the AI chips. And so I saw this as sort of the God's work of investment banking. If you look at how transformative some of these technologies and financing them were, then you start to ask the question from a market structure standpoint. How is it that we get more at bats in the engineering, scientific, entrepreneurial growth part of the economy? It supports our national defense. It supports our healthcare outcomes. All of that stuff. And so this is sort of the enabling technology in itself, which is markets done right, to kind of get people up out of poverty and solve all of these problems. And so I think that too many people take this stuff for granted, and it is the kind of the linchpin of long-term economic success, and we haven't done it well enough, and that's something that really kind of is important to get right. I mean, it's essential to get right. I wouldn't say it's important, Jeff. It's essential to get right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate your, keen interest in long-term success and upward mobility. It certainly rings true through, each of the positions that you've held. And, I'm curious what took you from working in the IPOs. I mean, obviously you're getting a lot of learned experience that's relevant, but how did you end up at NASDAQ as the vice chair and executive vice president?
Well, I was sort of Mr. Fix-It at Prudential Securities. I mean, I took over when I took over the Equity Capital Markets Group, which is where all the IPOs and follow-on equity offerings are done, and globally. And then it was a cost center of the firm, and I took it from an $8 million loss in the first year to a $14 million profit. And part of it was I just told people, let's stop thinking like we're a cost center. Let's figure out how to make money, and they did. And then because I was, all of a sudden that made me remarkable. I'm not sure how remarkable it was, but it was, as a business leader, I had a little bit of a Midas touch there. So they gave me some other messes to fix, and I was asked to do the strategic planning for banking, research, sales, and trading, and then we changed the strategy, and that tripled the amount of revenue and productivity per professional. I came up and actually Wall Street, we take this for granted, but at the time we were the first major bracket Wall Street firm that that got very industry focused. That was not a thing for the big wirehouses or for Goldman or Morgan. They were generalist investment banks, and we took them hard in the direction of creating these industry groups, and that actually really had a remarkably beneficial impact on the quality of the deals, the size of the fees, the likelihood that they were going to get closed, and so on and so forth. And then Wick Simmons, who was the chairman and CEO of Prudential Securities, he asked me to run a bunch of other businesses, and I got moved around. I was CEO or president of PrudentialSecurities.com, and then PrudentialFinancial.com, and then Wick got asked to be the chairman and CEO of NASDAQ by Frank Zarb, who was running the NASD at the time. And when he did that, he asked me if I would join him to run the listings business, because he needed somebody that understood that CEO client base, which we had obviously in the investment bank. So that's how I ended up at NASDAQ. But of course, because I had a tech background, all the companies that I loved, a very large number of the innovators were there, and I had, Steve Jobs was, I think I told you I was the complaint department for Steve. I mean, I think Wick got, tired of him calling to complain. So his executive assistant was told to say, Mr. Simmons is not here right now. Can I transfer you over to David? And then that began a long relationship with him using me as a focus group of one to help design the iPhone. I didn't know it at the time, but looking back over the conversations, I know exactly what he was doing.
That's really cool to hear. And yeah, I mean, those years, those early 2000s in the NASDAQ had to be huge from a tech perspective. And there must have been a lot of companies coming on board. And, obviously thinking of what Apple was going through at the time is pretty poignant as well.
Yeah, I mean, people look at folks who are successful with the blinding light of hindsight, right? And Steve Jobs failed at a lot of stuff, right? And Craig Barrett, who was the CEO of Intel at the time, I was in Craig's office in Silicon Valley, and Craig was picking on Steve Jobs, saying Steve is really good at figuring out what that 3% of the population that doesn't want to be like anybody else wants to do, because at the time, the Mac was kind of a sideshow, and then he came up with the iPod, right, which basically replaced the Sony Walkman, and it turned it into a big consumer products company. And Intel didn't see it coming. I mean, I don't think anybody saw it coming, which is all of a sudden the market value ended up eclipsing, going from well below that of Intel to all of a sudden much larger than Intel. But it's sort of like with Steve, Jobs did not know that the BlackBerry was a thing that people were using for asymmetrical communication, and that his Mac didn't integrate with the BlackBerry, right? And that was when he started to threaten me that he was going to take his listing over to the New York Stock Exchange. I said, because he found out we were standardized on Dell laptops and not Macs, and I said, Steve, we love the Mac, we use it in the graphics department, but we can't use the Mac with the salespeople, with the rest of the organization, because it doesn't integrate with the BlackBerry, and people are using that email communication asymmetrically, and it's absolutely become an essential tool for people when they're out on the road. And so, actually, to his credit, he found that very interesting. He didn't realize that, and that was the basis for the next 2 years having a once a month, half an hour to an hour meeting to bat around ideas about how people were using technology in the workforce. And I didn't know it at the time. This is all the way back at 2001-ish, 2000. Okay, so if you look at the time stamp here, I don't think it was until 2007 or so that the iPhone actually, came out, the first iPhone. So we were actually having a conversation about applications and that could be used on these devices, and that ultimately became, he didn't call it the App Store at the time, but that's what he was thinking through. All the way back in 2000, 2001.
Yeah, that's really fascinating to think about. I mean, I was growing up during that era. I was a bit of a, tech nerd, so I was very much following Apple and everything that was going on, and obviously the iPods. And, one thing I especially appreciated about them is they didn't have to be the first to release a type of product. Like, they weren't the first to release an MP3 player, but they were the first to release the best one. The one that was going to take over the market. Kind of same with the smartphone. They weren't first, but they were the revolutionary. And I always appreciated that about the ethos of Apple, about Steve Jobs, that they were willing to wait to release something to get it right versus just trying to throw things out there like some of the other companies.
Well, when that first product entry point came out, you would ooh and ah. I mean, it got everybody's attention. It was, the cool factor was palpable. He was a design nut, but I mean, I also think that he was an aesthetic. I mean, he really kind of, he wanted things that that were going to excite people, and he was really good at that part of it. I think it was very much in his bones.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it was just a very enriching experience spending time at the NASDAQ. And, what led you to then starting IssueWorks, where you were chairman and CEO?
Well, I think when we went down a path and we were concerned about capital, markets and where they were going, and we thought that we could, well, I mean, we know we can do this. We thought that we could broaden distribution on new issue equities and help issuers and investment banks, get more stock into the hands of more of the people that are going to care about the stock. Double the institutional investor interest in a deal, but also improve the quality of the institutions that are in the book, and get a stock to better be supported in the aftermarket. But I think that what we didn't understand at the time was that, yes, we were very successful when we were brought in by companies to sit on management side of the table and work with the investment banks to kind of force them to do something. But we had we had hoped that the investment banks would welcome what we were doing. And what we discovered was they were not our sales channel, because they're systematically underpricing new issue equities to the top 20 institutional investors, and they're shaking them down for commissions, is what's going on. So, you're trying to convince a CEO why a stock should be underpriced by 40%, needs a 40% pop in the aftermarket. And it's one of the challenges you have down in Washington. They always get on their soapbox about the 7% growth spread for an IPO, being too much. And why is it? Well, if they understood that these deals were being way underpriced intentionally, and they were being not properly distributed intentionally, because that's what's left of the economic model. Because when they went to all electronic markets, you couldn't make money in the aftermarket any longer, right? And then you do regulation, fair disclosure on the research side, so the research gets devalued. So the only alpha generating capability that's left for the typical sell side firm on the equity side is systematically underpricing new issues, whether they're IPOs or follow-ons. So guess what they do? They systematically underprice new issues. Who does that hurt? The issuers. It drives up their cost of capital. So it's become a market which is hostile to the interests of companies, and a lot of it has to do with. I mean, one of the things I'd love to get changed is the SEC's mission statement, because it isn't a mission statement; it's a three mission statement. It's three mission statements in one, and there's no unifying theme. Their mission statement is investor protection, capital formation, and market integrity, right? Which one do you focus on? So they go down the rabbit hole of, defining investor protection as lower cost trading. Well, no. I mean, what that does is they actually have thrown the incumbent investor under the bus in this country. They don't protect you once you're in a deal. They just protect new investors coming in, because it simplifies the equation, right? So as a consequence, we have a market that doesn't serve what markets are supposed to serve, which is the economy, okay? That's why they exist. They're there to drive the economy forward, to help U.S. competitive advantage. And so we don't think of it in those contexts. And if we did, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing to the microcap stocks, and which is the feeder system to the big leagues.
And so it seems like the various issues with the markets and how they weren't supporting what they were supposed to in terms of growth in these companies, that's what led you to want to get involved in legislative efforts.
I would be misspeaking, Jeff, if I said that I set out to get legislation done. I set out to sort of educate people broadly about things that were obvious to me that were not obvious to anybody else. And for 3 years, people made me out to be a crackpot. And, what they would say is that, it's a market cycle issue. And I would say, no, it's not a market. These are people on equity capital markets, equity syndicate desks at Morgan Stanley, Goldman. I got a call from the CEO of one of these firms when we got the Jobs Act done. He said, David, congratulations for going from whack job to conventional wisdom in the short space of 3 years. And I said, why was it that you didn't say anything? And he said, because I knew they were going to make you out to be a whack job, because there was so much, at stake in people not believing that the stock market was not working well for issuers, right? And people because they're making their living by by underwriting, by saying the window's open, go public, go public, go public. But if you get under the covers of the big Wall Street machines, instead of giving people big broad distribution and following stocks in the aftermarket, what they're doing is they're allocating stocks to a very narrow number of institutions today versus what they used to do. They're flipping them. They're putting it out into a wealth advisor network, which is not following stocks. So they take it as candy. They juice returns for their best clients, and then they blow out the stock. It's completely deleterious, harmful to the interests of capital formation in this country. It really needs to be redone because the country can't succeed. You can't pay down the deficit this way, okay? I mean, if you think about it, right, we're incubating companies for 14 years before they do an IPO to unicorn status many times, right? I mean, it used to be that we were taking them public when they were 4 years old. Okay, what does that do? That's a tax event. What does that do? That brings money into the U.S. Treasury. And so, so if the velocity of capital improves, the amount of tax events. When was the last time we had close to a balanced budget in this country? It was during the Clinton administration, right? What was going on during the Clinton administration? We were doing 900 IPOs a year instead of 150 today.
If you're enjoying this episode, I would greatly appreciate if you could review, like, comment, or subscribe on your favorite platforms. Your engaged support goes a long way in helping the show grow and getting our impactful guests heard. Now back to the show. So how do you feel that the markets are now relative to, when you started getting into these issues? Like, has it gotten worse?
It's better, but it hasn't gotten worse. It's gotten better, but not better enough. Like I want to turbocharge the economy and the innovation part of the economy. I think it's essential to keep us free as a nation. I mean, we as democracies have to be able to outcompete countries like China that have 1 billion more people than we do, and and that means that we have to do a great job with our alliances, with NATO and other democratically aligned countries. We have to, and on the R&D innovation side of the economy, that feeds military advantage, national security. So these things are all related. I mean, it was in 2015. I did a speech it was the President's Forum at Lafayette College. The theme was capital markets is a way to solve the great challenges of our time. And I listed the kinds of things that we had grown up with, going back to the Vietnam War as anomaly, these challenges, Ebola and all sorts of things that, they show up with great regularity. There are lots of challenges. They are constant. It's sort of like these are not uncommon instances. They're just different when they come in over the transom. What is the story stock part of the market, but the problem solving part of the market? It needs to move quickly and effectively to get capital into places where scientists and engineers can drive solutions. I said, here's a list of challenges for your generation. This is 2015. Do you know what the number one challenge was on my list? Pandemics. 2015. And do you know that Lawrence Kim told me that the Jobs Act funded Moderna's messenger RNA technology that Lancet said saved 2 million lives. It crashed the amount of time to get to market because money got in, because the scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurs were able to get funded because of liberalizations we made in their ability to communicate with investors. Okay, this stuff is incredibly powerful. And by the way, it tripled the number of IPOs in the life sciences area in the first 5 years. This is the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. And that led to 18 new drug approvals, according to Bio, in the first 5 years. Okay, this stuff saves lives. We need to do more of it. There's a piece of legislation from Congressman Emmer's office called the Main Street Growth Act, which is a venture exchange that I've worked on. I mean, it needs to be a fundamental part of U.S. policy going forward. You can't have people stand in the way. It's what's going to solve problems and give the U.S. competitive advantage, really turbocharge upward mobility. It's an essential tool in the arsenal of long-term U.S. success. And yet you have some people out there that are standing in the way because they want off-exchange privileges, meaning they just want to trade it as opposed to add value. Story stocks need to be that you need the storytellers, you need research, you need people that are getting on the phone, that are brokers that are calling up investors with an idea. Because how do you price a story stock, an early stage semiconductor, an early stage medical device company? Somebody has to tell a story. It doesn't work because there's no revenue yet, right? And that whole culture of figuring that out, we have to rebuild that culture in this country if we're really going to be a successful nation over the long run. And as I was telling, Congressman Emmer is up in Minnesota, and Minnesota historically had a lot of medical device companies. Do you know, if you go back to the 1990s, the single largest number of small IPOs was in the medical device industry because they were all single product companies. I mean, this stuff saves lives. It's absolutely essential. You want to bring semiconductors onshore, you got to bring the development part of it back onshore, which is the pre-revenue innovative part. That supports the U.S. military. So, we really are, we really cut our nose off to spite our face, because we end up with a lot of amateurs meddling in markets, and they don't understand the implications, or we politicize the markets, unfortunately.
Yeah, very much so. But working with the medical devices, having your legislation, lead to Moderna's success, that must be rewarding to sort of see the efforts that you put in come to fruition in sort of the real world.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually overwhelming on some level. I mean, you think something is going to help, and then to run into instances like that are such tangible proof that it's right. And by the way, look, I mean, people call me the father of the Jobs Act because I was effectively the catalyst, right? But I don't want to take anything away. There were a lot of people in Congress that worked on this, and there was a lot of innovation that went around different titles of the Jobs Act, or different bills that came together under the one big act. I mean, it is politics ultimately, and Congress is a team sport. The one thing I would tell you is that our U.S. Congress did a real service to the American people with the Jobs Act, that they really did some things that mattered, that saved lives, and that they should be commended for it. And that the amazing thing about that legislation was how bipartisan it was. It was incredibly well received on both sides of the aisle. It was actually, the reason why it got signed into law is because, even though it started out as a Republican piece of legislation, is that President Obama, we had gotten into the U.S. Office of Science and Technology Policy, and one of the senior policy advisors to Obama went and had a conversation with him. And the next thing you know is that President Obama put two lobbyists on the Senate Democrats saying that the president wanted this bill. That's what I heard through the grapevine. So, I mean, it was really a classic team effort, bipartisan. I think most Americans don't see the bipartisan work that can and does get done. But the House Financial Services Committee has been a real bright spot in that, and the Senate Banking Committee, in terms of people rolling up their sleeves and getting actual, legislation that makes a difference done. I think we just have to load the calendar with things and papers that are really, better thought out and educational. And I think you'll get a lot of work out of the Congress. I mean, something really interesting happened to me, Michael. I took my oldest son, when I was testifying in front of the House Subcommittee on Capital Markets and Government-Sponsored Enterprises, and I was testifying in support of this venture exchange construct called the Main Street Growth Act, and I said to him, that the reason why we're doing this work is for his generation, right? And a very, very encouraging thing happened to me. Gave me goosebumps. Is that when we got to the Q&A section, almost every one of the congressmen started naming off Johnny, Peter, Susie. That's why I'm here. They started naming their kids, right? And it gave me some great optimism that the people that maybe not all of them, but most of the people that are in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. Congress genuinely care about the direction of the country, and that they can come together and they can do things that matter. They can do things that save lives and improve the outlook for this great nation of ours. And so I think we just have to effectively come to them with the kinds of ideas fully vetted and understand the political realities. And I think we'll move the country forward at a much more rapid clip than we have.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something that would be refreshing for our country, and I hope that we're headed in that direction. And I want to talk about your current company, Weild and Co, and how that started and what you guys are up to.
Yeah, well, um, it's an investment bank that serves the growth economy primarily, right? And we are, we have a vision that, just like Uber, just like Airbnb, which are network effect companies, just like NASDAQ, we can do the same thing with an investment bank in the cloud. And we'll move it. We'd like to take it to from 126 professionals in 20 states to 1,000 professionals, and get people communicating over the internet so that they can partner and get things done. Um, and so that if you need a medical device expert, you'll find one on the network that you can partner with. If you need somebody who knows something about real estate, commercial real estate, you'll be able to find that. Oil and gas, climate change, electric vehicles, all of these businesses represent industries, represent micro ecosystems, and what you're looking to do is to pull together the right members of a project team that can actually do a better job fulfilling the needs of the entrepreneur. And so, we feel that if we can do that and at the same time set up a tax deductible foundation, we're going to call it the Weild Foundation for American Competitiveness, and leverage our experience getting the Jobs Act done, that we can turn this thing into investment banking as a movement, right? Which is the God's work of investment banking, which is that stuff that really helps drive up the economy at the same time that we continue to load the gun with fully vetted, viable, pro-growth policies that are things that everybody can get behind, and ultimately will serve the problem-solving part of our economy and drive up economic growth. Hopefully, help knock down the deficit. It's motherhood and apple pie, and we think that we can have the country coalesce around a business like that. And look, I want to get. We're going to set up a minority and women-led business practice here. I mean, I've already got the people working on things like that on our platform. I mean, that that's how we met a little bit, and we want to turbocharge that. It's so difficult when you're white, you're coming from a well-to-do neighborhood, trying to figure out how to get business done and business financed, and it's 5 times as tough if you're in the middle of a poor neighborhood and you're a person of color. So we want to get people that look like you, look like me, to start working with people that have a little bit more melatonin in their skin, and start understanding that we're part of one great nation, and we're all we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem, and get women better supported. I mean, if you look at the statistics in venture capital funded companies in this country, you're woefully underrepresenting women CEOs and people of color. And I think that, how do you change that? I think a lot of people like to complain about it, but I mean, the fact is that we have these ecosystems that confer advantages on the participants, so they don't naturally go to somebody outside the ecosystem because it doesn't confer an advantage on them, right? I mean, they're better off staying inside their ecosystem a lot of times. And that this is the natural course, and that favors the incumbents, which tend to be people that look like you and me. So if you can create incentives through systemic policy fixes that actually give an incentive for somebody in that enclosed ecosystem to reach out, then you can crack the code on something like that. It's not going to happen if we just whinge about it and complain about it, right? It's just not going to happen. So we have to come up with innovative solutions that create a carrot, and let the free markets work their magic.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you guys are up to some really both innovative work as well as work that that's going to increase the types of people that are involved in the finance world. I think that's pretty exciting, and appreciate the work that you're doing there. And I also noticed that you're the chairman emeritus of Tuesday's Children, and I was curious to learn a little bit more about that organization.
Well, Tuesday's Children was set up in the ashes of 9/11. It took care of the kids that lost parents on 9/11 with non-financial support services. So, we created this thing called the Promise, which is that we wanted to see those kids into productive adulthood. And so I was with an active member of the charity for 20 years and 8 years as the chairman of the board, and led it in a direction. I actually took a junior league course on nonprofit board management, and one of the things that I learned there is that there's a lot of charities that are founded in the wake of a major event like the Fukushima, nuclear disaster, and there's always a crise du jour of the year, and it siphons off all the largesse, and so it's very difficult to keep charities going that are founded in the wake of a major event like the 9/11. And in fact, there were 400 charities founded in the wake of 9/11, and today there's like 3 of them left. And Tuesday's Children is one of them, and it's largely because we reinvented the mandate to have a mandate that didn't sunset. And so today we provide non-financial support systems. It's all long-term recovery to other groups, including military families that have lost a loved one, and we work with the international community that's touched by terrorism. So we've done this thing called Project Common Bond that brings Israeli and Arab and Palestinian kids together, and kids from Dublin and the Troubles, and what it does is it's interesting. It depoliticizes a lot of what's been politicized. It makes everybody understand that here you are, and you're walking in the same unfortunate shoes as somebody who you thought was your enemy, and they're in point of fact,
Yep.
it causes a lot of these kids to. Some of them have actually gone on to study mediation and things,
Wow.
in college and grad school. So it's been a labor of love.
Yeah, it sounds like it really brings the sort of the shared humanity to the forefront, which I think is really key in sort of ending some of this divisiveness in our culture.
Absolutely. I mean, it's I like to say yeah, it's very easy for people to complain and to point fingers. It's hard for people to say, how can I be part of the solution? I mean, really, it's like take some ownership. And it's like in business, I always say to people, it's people show up and tell me something's wrong. I say, great, what's the solution, right? Don't just tell me what's wrong. Tell me how are we going to fix it, right? And it's so important, I think, that we develop a bigger culture around doing that, and understand our mothers taught us, to try and walk in somebody else's shoes, right? Try and understand what it's like growing up in a project poor, as the product of a single parent. Okay, I mean, be a little bit more compassionate and understanding, and then say, what are those people who are our American brothers and sisters? Where are they going, and how are they going to better contribute, and what can we do to ensure that they have better outcomes? I mean, we've done just a hellacious job. I mean, I was down in Texas. My wife is from Houston, and one of the people that was running for office, was talking about increasing sentences. Lock them up, lock them up, lock them up. I said, we already have the highest incarceration rates in the world. I mean, like, why? I mean, it sounds great, but I mean, what are you doing to people's lives? You give them a scarlet letter with a felony conviction when they're young and stupid, right? Which we all are at some point in our life, and we lock them up, and now we give them a scarlet letter, and we make them part of the chronically unemployable. It's what we do is we actually hurt our nation in the process of not figuring out how to have a better outcome, and it makes somebody feel better, and it's somebody else's problem. but it's tearing down the country because those people should be able to contribute to the economy as opposed to, leaving a hole in the economy. And so,
Yeah.
so hopefully we'll get people to start thinking about this stuff a little different over time. I mean, we need to. It's a, it's a, it's a, we're the worst in the world at incarceration rates. We have the highest in the world. It's not something to be proud of.
Agreed. Yeah, no, couldn't agree more on that. And just like you said, the scarlet letter of a felony on, someone young and dumb that likely also was under circumstances that led them to be more likely to even get in trouble in the first place. So, yeah, I can certainly appreciate that and appreciate all your work that you're doing in criminal justice reform and beyond. And I want to move on to some of the fun facts that you shared with me previously. So tell me about how you knew Michael Jackson.
Well, I lived in a building. I was president of the board in New York of a condominium at 111 West 67th Street. It's, if you've been to New York, it's where the old Reebok Sports Club was, and the Sony IMAX is now the AMC Theater. And gosh, we had some real notables in the building. One day, I had this strange guy show up. I was president of the board, and the people he wanted to look at an apartment. And so, as president of the board, they asked me if I would mind showing this guy my apartment. So I said, no, that's fine. What's his name? David Guest. And David, we got some notoriety years later because he married Liza Minnelli. And but he moved into my building. The next thing after I showed I get a knock on my door. Hey, neighbor. He bought an apartment in the building. Turned out he was a producer. He was the producer for the Doobie Brothers at one point, or the publicist for the Doobie Brothers. I met Michael McDonald, the Doobie Brothers, through him. I met Marilyn McCoo from Fifth Dimension. I met Pink. I met all sorts of people. He's very active in the music community. So turns out that David was growing up. He was best friends with Michael Jackson, and so he then went on to produce Miracle on 34th Street, which was a suite of concerts at Madison Square Garden. And so I got to know Michael through David. And I went to the Michael Jackson concerts with, David. And NASDAQ became a sponsor of them. We opened up the NASDAQ market with him. And if anybody wants to Google Michael Jackson, NASDAQ 2001, you'll see videos of a much younger, better looking version of me and Michael Jackson opening up the NASDAQ stock market, and me singing happy birthday to the king of pop, which has got to be one of life's most surreal moments, but still memorialized on videotape. But yeah, he was we worked through the video, the special that ultimately aired, I think, I don't know if it was on HBO or where it aired on TV. And I got to know Michael and David pretty well. And then I was the one so-called suit in the wedding of David Guest and Liza Minnelli. So I was an usher or a groomsman.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Must have been a really interesting.
Michael was the best man, and Elizabeth Taylor was the matron of honor.
Wow. It must have been an interesting crowd to spend time with.
Yeah, they're all, look, I think that what you realize is that, they're just like everybody else. Really, Michael McDonald of the Doobie Brothers couldn't be nicer. Okay. Really, literally, and Michael Jackson was perfectly nice. It was interesting because in a room full, I remember at the dinner with Whitney Houston was one of the, she sang in David Guest's apartment as well with Bobby Brown years ago. But Michael was put by the entertainment, by the music industry on an entirely different plane above even even a star like Whitney Houston, or Pink. Everybody was in all of Twitter when Michael was in the room. He was just sort of somehow seen as sort of, there was Superstar and then there was Michael, and it was kind of interesting to watch the reactions of people. But I think that they're all just people, and they are they have the same talent in a particular area. Some of them are extremely bright. I mean, Marilyn McCoo her dad was a doctor. I mean, he looked down, I think, his nose initially at her going into the music profession. She's a very bright woman, to people that are less gifted intellectually, but they're people, and most of them are actually pretty good people in the music industry, is what I learned, and it was a privilege getting to know some of them, and we very much enjoyed that chapter of our life. I mean, unfortunately, David passed away of a stroke, and David Guest did, and Michael, of course, passed away. Whitney passed away. I'm naming a bunch of people who are no longer with us, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad to have lost them, but really interesting that you had the time with them that you did, and I've got a couple more on this sort of fun facts list. You mentioned opening the market with Jeff Bezos, as well as Dean Kamen, who invented the Segway.
Yeah, they were doing the launch of the Segway, and so Amazon was obviously promoting it on the site, so that's why Jeff was there. By the way, Jeff is, I haven't seen him in years, but he was a really do a real he they were Amazon was going to be a sponsor of our Michael Jackson concert and everything, and that we were involved with, and his wife was pregnant at the time. And so he had an extra ticket and an extra seat to come back for this thing. And he saw a young African American woman that worked at Amazon that had nothing but Michael Jackson posters in her queue, and he invited her to fly on with him all the way to New York and go to the VIP reception for the Michael Jackson concert, which I thought was just really incredibly nice gesture on the part of Jeff. But what happened was I went up to Dean Kamen's facilities. He's an inventor, and a lot of what he has been charged to do over the years is to come up with a solution for stents or some very difficult engineering feat. And then he gets part of the revenue is a small portion for solving the problem, and so it's made him rather well to do. And when we were getting done with him demoing the Segways and up in his office before they were released, he said, I'm going back to New York because he was a member of the Economic Club of New York, and so was I. And he goes, can I give you a ride back? I said, sure. So Jeff, Dean Kamen, turns out drives me in his Hummer to the airport, and he's got his own private jet. He straps me into the co-pilot seat, which made me a little bit nervous, and then flies me into New York. I can't remember if we landed in Teterboro Airport or where it was. We went to the economic dinner in New York. At any rate, they decided to launch the Segway at the NASDAQ stock market. Amazon was a big listed company, and so you see that kind of iconic picture of me standing in the middle of Times Square in between Dean Kamen and Jeff Bezos, who are both on Segways, and me standing behind them in the middle, in front of the NASDAQ market site. So, it was a lot of fun. They were we had so many of these, these photos and people that we met. I met Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, when he was running Microsoft. Tom Stemberg, who was the CEO and founder of Staples, chaired my issuer affairs committee. That's the NASDAQ stock market. You have so many of these sort of legendary, iconic entrepreneurs, and they were wonderful. I remember sitting at a dinner with three of the notable NASDAQ 100 company CEOs, CFOs, and they were talking about the different sports teams that they had been trying to buy. It was a little a little surreal. But one of those individuals actually, at least one of them, if not two of them, have bought sports teams since then. So,
Wow. Yeah, that's a totally different world, and it sounds like really interesting, and especially the opportunity to kind of soak up some things from these legendary entrepreneurs that you mentioned. And that brings me to the question of, throughout your career, has there been anyone in particular that's been a mentor to you?
Well, A couple of people actually. My dad, and Wick Simmons, Hardwick Simmons. Wick was the CEO of Prudential Securities and then the CEO of NASDAQ, and both of them are incredibly principled, ethical people who have worked, have had you know they've seen obligations and they've seen them through, some of which were difficult. In Wick's instance, he took over a Prudential Securities that had a limited partnership scandal, and he was told that they were reserved, fully reserved when he took the job, $50 million, and it turned out to be over $1 billion and a real diversion. And he was capable of and sought after to do other things, and but he saw it through, and he did the right thing. And my dad has been very much that way. I have a handicapped brother, and that changed the trajectory of his life, and he's been steadfast in his support of his kids and his duty and his obligation. And so I think that I admire that. John McCain said one time, pledge yourself to, and I'll get this wrong, but the gist of it is, pledge yourself to a cause that's more important than yourself, and you'll reap indescribable rewards. And I think that's true. I think it's true.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And, so sort of zooming out from that, aside from family, if everything were to end tomorrow and whatever that means to you, what are you most grateful for or most proud of?
Love my kids. I have, 3 kids that are all fully functioning and, decent human beings, hardworking. And, I am, obviously incredibly proud of the impact that the Jobs Act ultimately has had on society. But I have to tell you, Jeff, that I'm maybe more insecure about feeling like I have so much more to give, and I need the resources to get everything done before I go meet my maker. I think that what the Jobs Act did was it showed me the potential of what can be done, and we need to do it at a dramatically greater scale. And I think it's because a lot of people depend on us. And there's a thing in Judaism we call it a mitzvah. In Catholicism you call it a sin of omission sometimes, which is this concept that if you have the ability to do something which is socially important or good, then you have a moral obligation to do it, that you can't just omit doing it. And I think those are things that guide me, and I'm hopeful that I'll be given the opportunity to contribute everything that I can contribute before I go meet my maker.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great perspective, and one that, anybody can hear and feel something about, and that's using the time that we have to get whatever impact done that we can. So I really appreciate you sharing that, and being vulnerable around that. And the big question that I make sure to ask every guest is this: if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be, and how do you think that change would reverberate?
Well, I think that I think we have to do more with alleviating poverty, and poverty in all of its elements. I mean, it's not just, there's a lot of the world that's not you know living on dollars a day. I mean, I went to I went to Kenya for my honeymoon years ago. It was a long time ago, and we were at a safari site, and we were the only couple there at the time. And so the guy that oversaw it was a native Kenyan, and he waited on us hand and foot, had dinner with us. A really nice man, And I gave him a tip at the time, which was $50 for 3 days worth of service. And he broke down in tears. And he said to me, "You don't know what this means to me." And I said, "Tell me." And he said, "It means I'll be able to buy meat for my children." And that left an impression, and
Yeah.
I think that, we are in the greatest nation on the face of the earth. I want to make sure that we continue to make it an even better nation. But at the same time, I think that, how we impact the rest of the world. I mean, we can be that shining city on the top of the hill. I think that was what Ronald Reagan called the United States. But we can't rest on our laurels. We have to be better than we are, and that means all of us. And I think that there's an opportunity to be much better than we've ever been as a nation. We just have to, put our shoulders and our backs to it, and I think we'll come out the other side and leave the country and the world in a better place. But look, we're in a race right now with climate change. I mean, let's stop the denial. I mean, I think anybody with any wit of common sense can look around and see that based on the aberrations, the anomalies that are going on with climate, that we got a real foot race ahead of us, and we need to pick up the pace here.
Yeah. There's certainly a lot of work to do around poverty, around climate, and beyond. And really appreciate the efforts that you're putting towards these causes. And I'm sure many people listening have been inspired and are wondering how to best support you and your impact.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, two things. You can reach out. We're raising money. We're also going to set up this foundation, which will be ultimately a tax deductible entity. We've got to institutionalize, all those economic papers. We can share the old ones that we did that led to the Jobs Act. I mean, it's, we have a pretty straightforward, approach to it, which is identify a big problem, help people see it graphically so that it, compels people and they're motivated, to change. Propose a series of changes and what the impact will be, and help people understand then by building alliances, allies, and minimizing the number of enemies, that it's a politically viable solution that somebody can use as part of their work into their policy pronouncements and raise money around so that they can get elected. It's the very practical side of policy, as opposed to, I'm just going to complain about, climate change. We got to figure out, we got a political reality here. How are you going to actually get something to actually go through, and why? And a lot of it is, is if you've got a series of enemies that are natural out there, how do you turn them into allies? Because sometimes you may have to create a grander bargain to bring them on side, but you've got to do that work. There's just a completely practical side of policy making that tends to escape most people, and then you add on to that a layer of congressional dysfunction, which is every 2 years there's a new Congress being seated. The past legislative calendar turns over, so if it's in process, it expires, right? And you look at people who chair committees. The House turns over from a Democratic to Republican control, or vice versa, and what's on the agenda changes. And so it's not only that you have to be almost magically well informed and tight and designing things, but you've got to. I like to say it's like being in an NBA basketball game. You have to hang out in the paint long enough to be able to get a rebound, right? And that means you have to have staying power, and you have to keep these ideas fresh. You have to educate, because there's going to be churn in the House. There's going to be new people coming in, old people going out, that were the ones that really understood what you were going to do. And instead of getting defeated, you have to kind of go in and continue to educate people, change the dialogue. And what will happen is They may not come up with the solution that you advocated for, but they will come up with a solution. They will come up with many solutions, which is what happened with the Jobs Act. And then ultimately you'll move the country forward. But you have to be able to keep people's eye on the prize. And that's what Weild Co is about, is that we want to contribute to the God's work of investment banking, which is the story stock, entrepreneurial growth part of the economy. Make sure that we nurture and support that and make it better, at the same time that we come in and educate people around what can be done. Because if we can do those things bigger, it's obviously going to help our stockholders, right? Because we're working in that part of the economy. I want to get a new IPO market done with Congressman Emmer because it's so important. But it's also part that would get me back into the public markets where I price 500 IPOs. Again, I don't do it right now because the market structure is tainted. Okay, it doesn't work for that. But if they fixed it, well, watch out, because we'd get America back in business again.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we are on track to start going that direction, and really appreciate your time and sharing your story with us and your experience, and excited to get this out there to the audience.
Jeff, thank you. And thank you for all your support, with the community. And, you've got a big heart, and I don't know how many people know that, but I'm really a fan of the things that you're doing as well. So appreciate you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of People Are the Answer. If you enjoyed the episode, share it with friends, and reviews or subscriptions on your favorite platforms go a long way to help the show grow. I want to share these incredible people and their remarkable work with as many others as possible. Thanks for your support. For more, go to peoplearetheanswer.com.